Okay, hi everyone. I'm Bart Lyman. I'm the state MTSS coach and also the MTSS coordinator in Evanston. We're going to go ahead and get started with our final MTSS coaching call of the school year. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll be following the running agenda. You should all have access to that. As far as a heads up today, I'm going to have you report out on two different questions after I go through the announcements. So the first question I'll have you answer is, what has been the most important lesson you have learned from your MTSS implementation this year? And then next, what are two MTSS implementation goals you will be working on next year? So if you'll just think about those two questions, I'm going to go through the announcements quickly, and then I'll have you answer those for me. Our presentations for the secondary webinar series as well as the family engagement series are being posted on the Project WIN website. We just had another secondary implementation webinar on progress monitoring. It was really good. I expect that that'll be posted in the next week or so. Also, you'll see that I have some of Tessie's handouts from the MTSS Summit in Riverton last week. Tessie is currently on vacation along with Jennifer, so it will also be probably about a week or a week and a half before the other handouts and her presentation are posted on the WIN website as well. So please be looking for those. The UMTSS conference, I just wanted to make one final plug for this. A great conference if you can go, very inexpensive, great information from practitioners who are implementing MTSS. I do have the website linked here so that you can click on it and find out the registration information and the other information you'll need to attend that conference. So let's go ahead and report out what has been the most important lesson you have learned from your MTSS implementation this year, and what are two MTSS implementation goals you'll be working on next year. So let's see here. Let me stop sharing this for a minute. Let's go ahead. Amy, would you mind reporting out on those two questions, please? How about Alexis? I don't know if you guys are. Alexis, can you guys hear me okay? If you can, maybe it'd just be easier if you just report it out. Alexis, Amy, Heather, or Catherine?
Hello? Heather and Leanne.
Hey, Heather, how's it going? Leanne, how are you guys?
Good, how are you?
Good. So do you mind answering those two questions for me?
Sure. We said the most important lesson that we've learned is just as a reminder to go slow to go fast. So make sure you have things in place and that knowledge is shared so that you can go fast when it's time to implement.
Okay, very good.
And then the two things that we're looking forward to for next year is we just met with one of our assistant superintendents and talked about targeted monthly meetings with our district team to look at district-wide data, to approach problem solving collaboratively, and to continue with professional development.
Excellent. Very, very good. Okay, others. Catherine.
There, I think that one.
Anyone else? Anyone else out there?
This is Amy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay. Vanessa and I talked about what's been the most important lesson we've learned this year is probably, how important it is to have a universal and a systematic process in place and how critical it is for our students' success.
Excellent. And then what are two things that you'll be working on next year with your MTSS implementation?
You know, probably a stronger approach to progress monitoring. We do some progress monitoring, but I think it's kind of hit and miss here and there. So probably a stronger, more systematic approach, especially for students who are on IRPs and GRPs.
Excellent.
And then probably the second thing is probably drawing more awareness across the district, you know, because right now just a few schools we've updated on MTSS and they kind of know what it is, but maybe more awareness across the whole district.
Excellent. How will you do that? Just out of curiosity.
You know, we haven't talked about that plan yet, but we're thinking of using the IFs, the instructional facilitators within the buildings, and helping them or using them to help us educate the principals on it.
Excellent. Very, very good.
The district committee too.
Yes.
Sorry, say that last piece again.
We had talked a little bit about our district committee that we've been working with, as having them kind of being, you know, as the forefront of some of that information too. How that would look, we're not exactly sure, but.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you guys very much. Fremont 25.
Hey there.
Hey, how's it going, Stuart?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So, are we reporting out on the 2 questions you sent out?
Yes.
Okay, I just popped in, so.
Okay, so yeah, what has been the most important lesson you've learned from your MTSS implementation this year, and then the 2 goals you'll be working on next year?
So, we talked about this a little bit today. Some of the things that we've learned, we learned that we kind of know what we don't know now.
Okay.
And, you know, and that we do have the ability to put a structure in place that supports systems for staff and students. You know, we're seeing that can be a reality. You know, we have to keep moving forward even if our systems aren't perfect, but that's okay. We can develop systems and do a lot of legwork while also moving forward with what we need to in the district. And then we also need to, we collect a lot of data, but we still aren't good at using it. And so, you know, developing training and decision-making rules and all those types of things with the data, I think is going to be important.
Okay, excellent. What do you think one of the biggest accomplishments you've made this year is?
I think we have district buy-in from the admin team. I think it's becoming more real for them. We met with the superintendent last week, week before. Yeah, the week before, and sat down with him and showed him everything that we had done with our teams. And so, you know, I think we were definitely slow to get going and had a lot of conversations that went nowhere, but I think with that, you know, we kind of learned a lot and found out what we really needed to do.
Cool. Good. Excellent. Very good work. Okay. Anyone else that would like to report out? Okay, let's go ahead and move into our professional development. Scott's going to be finishing the last 2 chapters, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 of RTI, The Forgotten Tier. You can access his PowerPoint presentation by clicking on the link. Scott, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Just one second. All right, Scott. You're welcome.
Let's see here. All right, so we're into the third and final section. There's actually 2 chapters in section 3, considerations beyond the classroom. I covered chapter 8. We'll discuss number 9 real quickly at the end, but basically the authors open up with kind of just a decent list, and I'm trying to synthesize it a little bit, but you know, the majority of this book is focused on the instructor in the Tier 1 classroom, and as we're wrapping up the book, they're just considering, you know, this classroom is part of a school, which is also part of the district. You can extend this out to state and also federal type of requirements, but there's a lot of things in education that go beyond the control and the scope of the individual teacher in the classroom. On the right, I listed some, and I was kind of having fun with the idea of, you know, a lot of these are actually manageable within the classroom, but ultimately, this is just part of a much larger framework. So I'm looking at things kind of towards the bottom, the screening and progress monitoring. Obviously, these things happen at the classroom level, but the selection and the use of that data, you know, usually are school or district level initiatives. So the whole premise of Section 3 is just the consideration that there's a lot of things happening in the classroom that are just beyond the control and the scope of the individual teachers. And they talked about, this is on page 102. It's kind of another one of these standard RTI triangle proportions of the different tiers. And but from this perspective, less from the classroom to the individual student type of level, it's kind of taking a step back, and we're looking at this through the lens of basically how the school and district leadership use these type of ratios to make curriculum decisions and to make adjustments to instruction materials and things like that, or other policies. But it's kind of the standard exercises that we've seen elsewhere in the book, but I thought it was a pretty decent review, and I kind of enjoyed looking at it's table 8.1 on page 102, kind of their description and implications of the different ratio breakouts. You know, for instance, on the first RTI triangle, you have a very high percentage, high ratio of your Tier 1 students. You know, and authors point out that this is, you know, probably a high-performing student population, so you need to look at ways to enrich your Tier 1, and possibly examine intervention practices in Tier 2 and Tier 3. But playing devil's advocate, I mean, it could also be some, potentially, I think, you know, some ideas with your actual data collection and your alignment of your assessments and data to, you know, the reality of it. Sometimes if your tests are maybe a little bit light or a little bit too easy, you might be able to overpopulate your Tier 1. The second one kind of suggests a very high Tier 2 ratio, which would be an indicator that you have some sort of gap or misalignment within your core Tier 1 instruction, your scope and sequence of the authors talk about the content and skills. And then also I think something that's pretty, from, you know, my interpretation, my exposure to MTSS, kind of an over-reliance on the Tier 2 interventions rather than the Tier 1 differentiation. So sometimes we're a little bit quick to jump straight into an intervention when your Tier 1, a solid Tier 1 curriculum can adjust most of that and handle it. The third one is where you start seeing a very high, they call it a disproportionately small Tier 1 and small Tier 2 and a very large Tier 3. Basically, you have a pretty significant gap in your performance with your students, and so that you should probably consider taking a really aggressive look at your Tier 1. The authors talk about considering a replacement to your core curriculum. You know, if the majority of your students are in an intensive Tier 3 intervention, something's definitely wrong at the foundational level. And, you know, this is, again, one of those things that go well beyond the classroom, the individual classroom and instructor. This would be a district and school level type of review. Then number 4, you kind of crush out that Tier 2 and kind of have an even split between your Tier 1 and your Tier 3 students. And again, that shows a gap in your Tier 1, your core curriculum, and then also the authors reference a quick referral to Tier 3 intervention, which, you know, earlier just on this webinar we talked about, you know, going slow and making sure you're doing everything right. I don't think there's probably ever really a cause for a quick Tier 3 referral. But I kind of like these because there's always multiple ways, multiple possibilities to interpret these graphs, and just one on their own you can't really tell all that much with, but just good examples. But again, these are things that, looking at it from a school or a district level, give you good indicators of your core curriculum and instructional choices at the school and district. And then I kind of merged a couple of the sections. They're talking about the changing demands of K-12, thinking about the student population. I see a lot of this as kind of like vertical alignment. So when you're looking at the MTSS systems, there's just a lot of things, there's a lot of wheels within wheels type of concepts within MTSS, and trying to get, beyond the individual classroom, you got to look at everything kind of in a holistic educational system type of perspective. And you got to remember that, your primary and your intermediate and your secondary grades, they all have to be synced, and there all has to be a cohesion, from pedagogy to scheduling differences between, the age groups that we're dealing with. Staffing ratios change from elementary to secondary. Your instructional focus, the authors spent a lot of time discussing kind of that concept of read to learn and then learn to read. Learn to read and then read to learn. So in your primary grades, you're targeting those strategic skills as a foundation, as your building blocks. But as the students grow through intermediate and then secondary, it becomes more like the interlocking puzzle pieces, is the reference the authors used, getting into more complex integrated tasks. And that's going to shift all the Tier 1 focuses and also the intervention approaches and strategies. There's a really good section in here also about cross-tier movement consistency. It's on page 104. They're talking about the unintended downside of tier-specific programs. Kind of like a horizontal alignment maybe within MTSS, where if the practices that you're using in your Tier 1 core appear radically different than your Tier 2 or even your Tier 3, it creates unintended consequences and confusion with the students, even though you're coming at it through an intervention to try something different or a little bit more intensive work with it. If there's a misalignment between your tiers, even within the same grade band, that can have some unintended consequences and some negative impacts on your students. So there's a lot of things for consistency, whether you look at it through the grade levels of kindergarten through a senior in high school, or even within the same grade level. There's a lot of moving pieces that all have to be synced up, and MTSS, with all the data-rich environment and kind of like the scientific method, the systems approach of it, all those pieces need to be synced up together. And there's just a lot of different changing demands in the K-12 population that all need to be hooked up and transfer and hand off well to each other. So, and then there's I guess on page 103, that's table 8.2, they have some pretty good, it's through a literacy instruction, but they talk about the different purposes and instructional focuses as you go through these different grade bands. I see things a little bit more through a math lens, but the idea still holds true. So, and then we get into the core Tier 1 replacement. Again, this would be something outside the bounds of the individual teacher in the classroom. Authors indicate that this is more typical in grade 3 and higher, being a high school instructor. A little bit outside of my element on this one, but talk about the data indicating that the Tier 3 student is too far below grade level, and essentially the need for intervention outweighs the need, a Tier 3 intervention outweighs the need for the Tier 1, but the authors quickly come back and talk about it's not that you're not delivering that content, the Tier 1 content is still there. It's just that the intervention is so large that you need to come at it from an alternative process, different instructional practices, different content, different materials. But again, that alignment needs to be there because the ultimate goal is if a student needs such a massive Tier 3 intervention, they're still going to return to a Tier 1 core curriculum, but with the Tier 2 services involved. So that's a pretty good section.
So Scott, can I interrupt you really quick?
Absolutely.
So you're essentially saying that Tier 3 instruction should be grade level standards, essentially, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit outside of my element on this, just because I've never actually been involved.
You're good. You're absolutely right.
But the concept makes sense to me.
Yeah.
When I first read it, I kind of missed that. I put it in italics mostly for myself. You know, it does not restrict access to the Tier 1 content or standards.
Right.
Because when I read it the first time, you know, that was kind of my assumption, but a better read of it, you know, and it makes sense to me. But again, it's just a little bit outside my element experience-wise, I guess.
Sure. No, it's great. Thank you.
And then the last one, again, stepping outside of the bounds of the individual classroom, I used a little bit different label, but basically the authors are talking about your district and school leadership, basically the buy-in of the entire system above and surrounding the classroom. And they talk about leadership, making sure that they advocate that the teacher are part of a larger network focused on the common goal. Again, kind of a systems alignment type of concept where, you know, I've seen that, you know, strong leadership, really keeping everybody in line is one of the most powerful things in education. We did a lot of Baldridge work at the department years ago and talk about arrows always being aligned. If you have different people going different directions, a lot of that energy is not quite as efficient as it should be. So definitely a strong role for district and school leadership, and I think I've heard that plenty of times listening to the district coaches out there of how important that is. Then also talks about leadership, assuring that the logistics are consistent for optimal implementation, down to scheduling, down to, you know, like even if your Tier 1 and your Tier 2 intervention or Tier 2 interventions, you know, require certain implementation, you know, that the school system, you know, the bell schedules and the block schedules and things like that allow for, you know, just those type of logistics would allow for the proper delivery of the educational platforms. And then finally, one that kind of chimes well with me just through the state level and looking at the new federal statutes coming through, talking about school and district leadership, allocating the proper resources for high-quality professional development. And again, you know, one of the largest impacts that you can see for the, you know, student achievement is just that high-quality professional development and a very solid plan wrapping around that classroom and the classroom teacher. So I thought that was a pretty good way to wrap up, and that wraps up Chapter 8. Chapter 9 gets into the checklist, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit hesitant to even breach that Tier 1 checklist, just because of all the work that I've seen happen through, you know, all the great MTSS work that, you know, Jennifer and Bart and the rest of the WD crew has been rolling out, and all the implementation checklists that I've seen and reviewed. I was a little bit hesitant to touch Chapter 9 just because I didn't really want to botch that job. But I think that the fidelity checklist and all the different checklists that have been provided through this coaching initiative, I think we kind of have Chapter 9 down. And that actually closes out the book.
Okay, excellent. Was there anything from Chapter 9 that you saw different, Scott, that we should know about? I mean, I agree with you. I think those checklists around Tier 1 are, I mean, you're going to find different checklists, but they're all essentially going to get to the same characteristics.
Right. I mean, I go back way to the beginning of this book where they talk about, just how important it is for a teacher to have that content knowledge and experience to be the expert, to see the full perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I trust myself to do a synthesis between your work and the work of the authors in this book, but I had fun with it. I sure did, but I'm not too sure if I
You're not going to wait
anything
for those
that I would
authors.
share with the group. It's a lot of fun for me as just also the way, I like to approach things. It's fun to compare and contrast the different checklists, but no, I don't think I'd want to offer any sort of observations just yet.
Okay, excellent. Do you mind going ahead and switching me back to the presenter, and then I'll go through my professional development. I do thank you, Scott. I want to thank you and Jennifer both. I know that in September when I asked you to present on this book, it was stepping out of your comfort zone. But I want you to know it's been beneficial for me, and I hope the other coaches as well. And I think we've got a nice resource with your PowerPoint presentation. So just know I really appreciate it, and thank you.
It's a really good learning opportunity for me, and secondary to listen to all the great facilitators and the wisdom coming in through the coaches at the district level. But yeah, I took a lot away from that book, so I enjoyed the process.
Good, excellent. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and move into my portion of the professional development. Sharing my screen here. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead. I don't see my... Oh, well. Okay. I'm going to go ahead here. So today I'm going to be talking or continuing the discussion about MTSS communication and professional development plans. We started this work a little bit last week. So again, I wanted to flesh it out a little bit more. Really my goal for you is by the end of the presentation, for you to have some tools that you can sit down with your teams with and develop these communication and professional development plans, okay? The real goal is to be able to look at your system, what happened this year, plan, and then move your district or your school forward in very intentional ways, right? By looking at this plan, by developing these plans, you're really involved in that continual improvement process, right? You're taking what you learned, applying it to next year. And so that's my goal for this. The core process is going to be the same. We've talked a lot about the problem-solving process over the course of the year. We're just going to take these 4 questions, right? What is the problem? Why is it happening? What are we going to do about it? How will we know it was effective? We're just going to take those 4 questions and now apply them to communication and professional development, okay? So let's go ahead and dig into the communication plan piece of this. I like this quote by George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think to some degree we probably all have fallen victim to this at one time or another. By developing a communication plan, you're really controlling for this illusion, right? You're saying, I'm going to plan for my communication the best I can so that I can ensure that people are learning the information that I intend, they're receiving and understanding the message that I'm sending. It's really that process, okay? And I think you'll be surprised at when you sit down with your MTSS teams and you just bring up communication and you go through this process of looking at the 4 questions, and I'll show you an example of our communication plan. I think you'll be surprised at how insightful they are. I know when I sat down with my team, all of these things just came to the surface, when we started talking about where do we want to be, why are there breakdowns in communication. So really, I think you don't necessarily have to walk into your team meetings having a plan laid out. I really would encourage you to just ask these questions and let them find their way through it, because they're going to bring perspectives and opinions that will help you develop a more rich and robust plan, okay? So the first question, what is the problem? And just as a refresher, you'll remember that we define a problem as being the difference between where we want to be and where we currently are, okay? So when we think about where we want to be, and I just typed up this generic statement, but I think it applies, right? I think as MTSS coaches, we could agree that this would be the ideal in communication. So all stakeholders, primary and secondary audiences, are receiving necessary information frequently enough to support implementation of MTSS, okay? That's really our goal. That's our gold standard. And those become the objectives of our communication plan. In the second part of this, where are we currently? And this is where you would sit down with your teams and say, okay, what communication practices do we have in place, right? Essentially taking a communication inventory, right? And then comparing that to the gold standard, okay? So that's how you're defining the need and the problem to be addressed, okay? So the second question, why is it happening? And you'll remember as well that when you're answering this question, you're just identifying factors that are within your control to change, okay? I listed these questions here for you to consider. I don't think those necessarily have to be a recipe for you. Again, I think when you define the gold standard, when you say, here's where we currently are, why is it happening, I think a whole host of things will come to the surface. But I listed these questions again for you to consider. So when we consider breakdowns in communication, do we have communication processes in place? And by processes, a practical example would be, do we have dedicated time at staff meetings where principals or you as an MTSS leader have talking points every week or every month that you're sharing with the staff, right? Those would be processes that would help enhance our communication. Have we identified all of the stakeholders that need to be communicated with and what are their needs? And I think you would agree with me that when we're implementing an MTSS framework, I can't think of one school staff member that doesn't need to be communicated with in some degree or another about MTSS and MTSS practices, right? So we may have lunch staff who are involved with reinforcing appropriate behavior, which is a tier 1 strategy, right? So they would need to know something about MTSS. You may have a custodian who is involved with mentoring a particular student, right, which is more of a tier 3 practice. So you can see how MTSS really, I don't know what the right word is, really affects everyone in the school system. So you need to identify all of those stakeholders and what information that they need to have. Are we providing ways for two-way communication? I think that this is something that came up in my team meeting, and I don't think we're unique, right? Oftentimes in school districts, we have information that is pushed down to various people or pushed out, but we don't spend a lot of time saying, okay, well, what was your experience with that information? What was your opinion, or how did that affect your practice, right? We don't really take a lot of time to do that. So when we're building a communication plan, we want to make sure that that two-way communication is embedded into our plan, okay? Finally, do we have people assigned to be responsible for communication activities? This gets to the idea that you can have a really awesome plan on paper, but then when you get to implement it, does it really happen, okay? So have you identified the specifics? Who, what, when, where, okay, when you're outlining the activities for your plan. Again, those are just areas where communication can break down. I encourage you to sit down with your teams, ask why communication is breaking down, see what comes up. Maybe use these questions as conversation starters if you need to, okay? So we've identified the problem, where we want to be, where we currently are. We've identified where the breakdown is, okay, or why it's happening. Now we're going to talk about what are we going to do about it, okay? And you'll remember me saying this as well, I'm sure, when I talked about the ABC problem-solving process. You really only want to choose one or two goals that are going to have the most significant impact, okay? I think communication plans can be very involved. They can be very complex. I think you need to, as a team leader and with your teams, consider the context of your school or your district. Ask yourself what can be accomplished. Start small and build momentum, right? Because you could very easily spend all of your efforts next year on just implementing a very detailed communication plan. And I'm not sure that would be the most beneficial thing. So take what you can accomplish, consider what will have the most significant impact, implement those one or two things really well, build momentum, and then add on to your plan as you go. You'll see in my communication plan, these, when we answered this question, what are we going to do about it? These three questions are how we fleshed that out, okay? So we looked at the different stakeholders and we said, what information do they need to know, okay? When will information be shared? And then finally, how will this group communicate needs, opinions, and practices? So that two-way communication piece. So you'll see how that answering those questions really became the body of our communication plan. How will we know it was effective? You know me by now. I mean, in an MTSS framework, we're always asking this question, right? We're taking these steps, we're doing these things. Are we having the intended impact? When we think about communication, I would encourage you to think about each stakeholder individually, okay? Think about what that stakeholder group will say or report or do differently as a result of your communication, okay? Because that's how we're really going to know things are changing, is when behavior changes. So build that into your plan as well, okay, is a way to determine effectiveness. And I know that can be more complex, right? People still have the option whether to change their behavior or not. But I think even before they change their behavior, they can report understanding, they can talk the talk, and those may be good indicators as well that they've received the message that you're communicating. So the organization of the communication plan, I added the 4 problem-solving questions here just so you could see where the different pieces of the communication plan fit. But I essentially have 5 sections, right? So we have our current communication practices, right? So this is just where we took our communication inventory. Our second section is the objectives. Where do we want to be, okay? This kind of morphed into what kind of practices we wanted to see as a result of our communication, and that's okay. I really wanted my team to just have experience developing the plan and have something that we could follow, right? What I'm going to do is each spring bring this communication plan back to the table and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, how do we need to adjust for the coming year, okay? Section 3, the problems. How did we know that communication was breaking down? We also looked at our target audiences, right? So we looked at our primary audience, or those who are actively involved in implementing MTSS. And we also looked at our secondary audiences, so those who are supporting the implementation of MTSS. And then finally, our plan, so the specific activities that we would be engaging in. So let me go ahead and show you this. And I encourage you, as I'm sharing this with you, I want you to think about what you would change, how you would improve it, okay? I know this isn't perfect, but we'll get there. So think about how you and your team could even make this better as I'm going through it. So as you can see, our current communication practices, I have lots of meetings, right? I have meetings with my district team, my building leadership teams. I have meetings with district leadership. But I think you'll find as I go through this what my assumption was, how I fell into an illusion, right? I have all of these communication practices going on as far as meetings go. We have professional development in the meetings, we have announcements, we have action items or talking points. But really my assumption was, as the MTSS coordinator, and it was incorrect, that people were taking this information and sharing it in meaningful ways with teachers and other staff members further down the line, okay? So that was our current communication practices. When we talked about objectives as a team, we really wanted everyone to have a common understanding of MTSS, and we wanted everyone to engage in common practices or processes, okay? And we felt like if people had that common understanding and common practices, we then could hold people accountable for doing what we taught them to do. We felt like it would build buy-in because people would understand their roles and responsibilities better. We felt like as a district, with a communication plan that was effective, we'd be able to focus our efforts, right? And that would lead to improved student performance. And finally, if we have a plan, then we're able to actually say, hey, we met the plan, the objectives of the plan, or we didn't. So there was a way to hold ourselves accountable as well and measure our effectiveness communicating with different stakeholders. So where we currently are, where we want to be, the problems. So where were we breaking down? Like I said, I was having lots of conversations with people, but it's like playing the telephone game, right? I was assuming that leaders were taking the information, sharing it just the way I did. And we know, you guys know as well as I do, that that just doesn't happen, right? Once you introduce humans into the equation, right, they start tweaking things. So we were having a lot of inconsistent messages being shared. And that can be significant, right? So if I'm talking about screening practices and determining if someone is at risk, it makes a big difference if one principal shares with their school that on the MAP test, the cutoff for Tier 1 is the 30th percentile and above versus the 60th percentile or above. And that sends the whole system into chaos, right? So inconsistent messages was an issue. We also have training that's tailored to each school, right? So when we got started with our MTSS implementation, each building said, you know, we want to do it our way, so help us out, and you know, we'll figure it out as we go. But the team came back and said, no, we really need to align our efforts. It's like Scott sharing the analogy of the arrows, right? We really need to align our efforts so that we're focused on the same topics, we have the same messages, and we're building the same understanding, right, through a systematic approach. And that, putting that energy all together will help lead to better outcomes for our students, okay? And then finally, we identified that some target audiences were not receiving frequent enough communication, okay? And that really was an issue with our processes not being in place, okay? So I think, yeah, so those were the problems we identified. As far as target audiences go, we really wanted to focus on 4 target groups, okay? We identified as the primary audiences, the implementers of MTSS, is the principals and teachers, okay? And then secondary, those who are supporting the implementation of MTSS, parents and superintendents. So we took these 4 stakeholder groups and developed a plan for each one. So let's go ahead and I'll just show you how this looks for principals, okay? And you can scroll down through here to look at the other ones. So what information do they need to know? My team said, okay, they need to know the purpose, plan, specifics. When we talk about specifics, they need to know the definitions, processes, decision rules, non-negotiables. They felt like principals need to share information between buildings. And then finally, they thought it would be beneficial, instead of them or myself doing a presentation, in addition to that, developing talking points for everyone. So essentially, I would give a presentation, but then I would have a sheet of information in very basic, straightforward language that said, here's what MTSS is. Here's how you say it to a parent. You know, just really giving them something concrete so that they wouldn't have to try to get that information from my presentation, right? And that would help with the consistency. When will information be shared? We're going to have meetings twice a month, okay, with a small school team. The idea being that we're going to combine 2 teams so that we're cutting down on that extra communication loop. The idea also being with the teams attending this meeting that if one person misses, obviously there will be 1 or 2 others there that can get the information and then share that with the person who's not in attendance. How will we know our communication was effective? Okay, so the way we define this is principals will share information covered in the MTSS leadership meeting with staff at their connections meeting. Okay, so that'll be once a week. There'll be dedicated time for, there'll be 5 minutes of dedicated time in those connection meetings where MTSS topics can be covered. And then also the building principal will protect MTSS building meeting time. And then finally, we'll know that we've been effective in communicating if principals are sharing relevant information with parents, okay? And this is in the form of newsletters during parent-teacher conferences or parent nights or back-to-school nights. As far as this group communicating their needs, opinions, and practices with us, we're going to dedicate some of our meeting time to them reporting out on how they're doing sharing the information. Is the information understandable? Is there too much? Is there not enough? So they can give that type of feedback to us so that we can start altering what we're giving them. Also, they'll be encouraged to talk to their staff after their meetings to get feedback as well, and then bring that feedback back to our group. So you can see how we're trying to build that in. And then you can, like I said, you can look down through here, teacher, parents, superintendents, okay? And now this is just the start of our communication plan. We'll get this in place next year and then add on to it the year after that. Like I mentioned, support staff, that would be another stakeholder group that we would want to include. Okay, let me go back here. I also have included here some of the resources that Tessie shared with us for developing a communication plan. These can be used to help you walk through this process as well. So just know that those are there. Okay, any questions about the communication plan before I move on to professional development? Okay, professional development plan. I'm going to be repeating myself a lot, it feels like, with the 4 questions, but it is what it is. We're going to apply those 4 problem-solving questions to the professional development plan as well. I did put this slide in here because I think it's important, and it probably goes without saying, but I wanted to state it anyway, what research says about effective professional development. Hattie gives it an effect size of 0.51, and you'll remember that 0.4 or higher is a significant effect size. So we can really get some traction with our implementation efforts when we're developing an effective professional development plan. Okay, so let's start with the first question. What is the problem? Again, recognizing where we want to be and where we currently are. I'm always going to pull you back to that MTSS checklist. It's a really great way to quantify where your system is and where you need to go. And I would argue that professional development is related to every item on that checklist. So as soon as you rate yourself lower in one particular area, it's almost going through the communication plan again. It's saying, okay, we know that we're weak in this area. Who needs to know what? When are we going to teach them? What's the topic going to be, right? What resources are we going to use? And I'll share these questions with you in a minute. But every item on that checklist requires professional development to one degree or another. Why is it happening? Oftentimes, breakdowns with professional development have to do with resource allocation, right? Superintendents have so many different issues that they're trying to address that you may bring up professional development for MTSS and they'd say, I'm not really sure we have time for that. So I would argue time may be the most valuable resource, right? And we need that time to adequately train stakeholders. Not only train them, but then follow up with coaching and additional training to ensure that our training is leading to changes in practice. There was something else I wanted to say about this. I think I mentioned time, but I know with the budget cuts in Wyoming, that's also going to change how we look at professional development. I would encourage you as MTSS coaches, there are so many resources out there. I think that if you haven't done this, I think you certainly can. Present yourself as the leader of MTSS implementation. The resources are out there for you to lead this work, okay? And if you need any help, give me a call. But I think really being able to pull in outside trainers, I think districts are going to feel more and more of a squeeze to do that and look for people inside the district to lead this work. And you all are certainly capable of doing that, okay? Okay. All right, so what are we going to do about it? This is no different than the communication plan, right? We're going back to our we're looking at our data, we're going back to our checklist, and we're choosing those 1 or 2 goals that can have the most significant impact on student outcomes, right? Now, that's different than saying we're choosing the 1 or 2 things that are the easiest to do. And I recognize that you still have to consider your own context, but what are the 1 or 2 things that we can do that will have the most significant impact on student outcomes? And I would ask you to pose that question to your teams, right? Don't always go for the easy thing. Choose something that's more challenging that will get you the outcomes that you want. Again, having said that, I still think you start with 1 or 2, start small, accomplish your goal, go back to the checklist, choose the next thing, accomplish it, and you just keep following that process, okay? So these are some of the questions I mentioned earlier. When you look at your checklist and you identify that area of need and you're thinking about professional development, you're answering these questions, right? Who will do the professional development? What resources will you use? When will professional development be done? What will be the topic of professional development? How do professional development activities relate back to the needs identified on the implementation checklist? Okay, so if you're able to answer those questions, then you have a solid professional development plan in place. I did put an example in here for you just so you can see it. You've seen this one before, right? This is our district they have fidelity checks happening for the curriculum that's being used, but it turns out that their fidelity checks are showing them that very few people are implementing the core curriculum the way it's supposed to be implemented, okay? So walking through the 4 problem-solving questions and looking at professional development, this is how this process would go. So what is the problem? Curriculum needs to be taught as intended by developers. So that's where we want to be. Where we currently are, that's not happening. Why is it happening? Teachers have not received sufficient training on how to teach curriculum. What are we going to do about it? 2 hours at each of the next 3 PD sessions will be devoted to reviewing and practicing guidelines for teaching the curriculum. How will we know it was effective? 1 fidelity check will be completed for each teacher before the next benchmarking period. So you can see how we took that 1 criteria. Who needs to know what? We worked through the 4 problem-solving questions, and this would be a plan, right, for addressing that need. So let me go ahead and show you what I have here. So this is a professional development plan that we're working on for my district. We have our goals, right? Common understanding, common practice. How will we know it's effective? Essentially, everyone will be using the same practices, okay? Whether we're talking about identifying students at risk, setting progress monitoring goals, interpreting progress monitoring data. We have people who are going to the correct resources, going to the appropriate resources to select Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And then people have a common understanding of Tiers 1 through 3, okay? It's quite a list and probably too much, frankly. But I may talk to my team about whittling that down some more. But what I've tried to do with my professional development plan is loop through the different topics. So you'll see for my district and building team, twice a month meeting, I've got various MTSS topics. And then I'm also going to produce a 10-minute video each week on these topics that principals can share with their staff, okay? So that's how I'm addressing that piece of the professional development. What else do I want to show you about this? I did mention that I am choosing a few things to cover those first 4 months, but then you'll see that in the second half of the year, I'm looping back through. Okay, so I'm teaching them the information, giving them some time to practice, and then coming back with a fidelity check. And I'm hoping that that will reinforce the learning, right? So this is a professional development plan that I have. Again, I think you should look at this and say, I would do it different this way, or if I added this piece, it would be more effective for my district. But again, we're really looking at moving, I know I'm repeating myself, it's that important. We're looking at moving our districts forward in intentional ways, and professional development is how we do that, okay? So that is my plan. Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward stuff, right? Okay, if you do have questions about either your communication plan or your professional development, please email me. I'd love to talk more about this with you. So let me go ahead and close this, and we'll get back to our agenda. Okay. I do want to debrief quickly. I want you to share with me some information about the coaching calls, okay? What did you feel like worked with these coaching calls? What didn't work? And what would you change for next year? So everyone just go ahead and unmute yourselves. And let's go ahead and start with what worked with the coaching calls.
Bart, this is Nicole at Fremont 25.
Okay, Nicole, how's it going?
Going good. One of the things Stuart and I were just kind of talking around to each other is the fact that our coaching calls broke everything up into, small little bites for us across the school year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we were able to relate that to our own work happening in the district.
Okay, awesome. Did you feel like the topics were relevant to what you were doing?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
We were really focused on Tier 1, so we really honed in on a lot of that information.
Okay.
Well, Stage 1 and then Tier 1, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was just constant self-assessment. The information that was provided, we were able to always go back, we don't do that, or we need to work on that, and so just making notes throughout it was, I thought, really helpful.
Okay, great.
And I think that was another thing that was beneficial about the coaching calls is we were all, or at least we felt at our district, the freedom to be able to tailor things to where we were at in the process.
Oh, okay. Okay, excellent. Anything else? Are there things that you would change for next year?
Probably, but just specific to us, I can't really come up with anything right now. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Others?
Hey, Bart, this is Alexis.
Hi, Alexis.
And hi. I felt like your resources worked very well, especially the videos and the book study that we did.
Okay.
Even though the information was familiar, it still was good to read.
Okay.
On changing, I don't know that it's necessarily anything format-wise or content-wise. I have done a couple more of these type of meetings and have found that actual, a headset with a microphone helps with feedback.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That was still an issue.
Occasionally, not near as much at the end as it was at the beginning.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Are there other things? You guys are way too nice. Come on.
This is Heather and Leanne.
Hey, Heather.
So what we're going to add, a couple, though, the same thing on what worked for us is definitely the resources. That was a great resource, especially some of them that we were able to pull from you with the handbook and things like that.
Oh, good.
For us, one of the things that we've talked about that didn't work well is we've used other meeting platforms that are a little more interactive. This platform doesn't really allow for or something about near as much interaction where you learn from the conversation.
So do you have some suggestions of other platforms that work well?
So I know we've done a lot with Zoom. I don't know.
Okay.
That's the one that comes to mind that's the easiest.
Okay.
But that just seems to allow for more interaction and a little more, participation with without feeling like you're stepping on each other's toes all the time.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, thank you.
And then I think for changing for next year, that would be kind of that piece of I would try to design the meetings to be a little more interactive, where there's feedback more, maybe ahead of time, sending examples ahead of time, sharing things on a platform ahead of time, and then having the focus of the meetings actually be more interactive about, so okay, we've shared everybody's handbook, what are you doing? That just would empower us to have more conversation versus just look and sit and get.
Yeah, great point. What do you think about a flipped classroom type model? Is that kind of what you're getting at? I mean, sending out some kind of assignment beforehand, review this material, do this activity, and then let's come together and talk about how it worked.
Yeah, kind of more of that, so that we've actually, or even, not so much it would have to be 100% flipped, but it's even, okay, so we just finished discussing Tier 1. Everybody, in the next month, you're going to go do this for Tier 1, and then we're going to come back and talk about how you implemented it, what worked well, what didn't work well. Then do a little bit of learning, but not as much as what you're doing online, where we sit and do so much sit and get, and then have a targeted and piece that we go back and do between. So you can do a combination.
Okay, excellent. Great feedback. Thank you. Other things?
Hi, Bart. This is Vanessa and Amy.
Hi, Vanessa and Amy.
Yeah, we really appreciated, actually for us, some of the information was a few things that we've heard, but a lot was very new information. So honestly, I really appreciated just kind of getting the information before, and just the wealth of different resources that you provided through Google as well as the book study. It really helped lead all of our work at a district level. And so
for our level of learning with MTSS, that was very helpful for us this year.
Okay, excellent. So you feel like you've grown some?
Oh gosh,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Suggestions for things to change?
Not really with the learning within this. I don't feel like at this time.
Okay.
I can't say that I can think of anything at this time either.
Okay.
We were kind of saying how beneficial it would be for our district committee meetings to have all of this information as you present it. I mean, for them to hear it would be really beneficial too. That's what we were just discussing.
Do you think it would be helpful then, for example, if, like the presentation I just did, if I were to record that and that were just a separate piece you could use in your meetings?
Yes,
I really do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, as you're first learning anything new, you're just nervous that you're going to make sure and present the information as it was presented to you. So I think that would be really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, very good. Anyone else? Other thoughts? Okay, this is all really good feedback. Excellent, that I will incorporate. I sent out an email earlier about your self-assessment. I just want you to do this for your own self-reflection, okay? When we talked in October, this is the list of things that you all came up with for how you would evaluate your own effectiveness as an MTSS coach. Really, that Google form just encapsulates these different things. So what I'd like for you to do is to fill out that, I think it's 6 questions, and then just think about what you would change next year as far as your coaching practice that would make you more effective, okay? And then finally, there is one more survey for the webinar. This is for the SPDIG grant, so this is how they show that we're being effective or not effective. Please fill it out as well. You all have been great. I look forward to next year. We're going to continue with the coaching project, and we'll be doing some planning over the summer, hopefully refining this process so we can give you even more support in your districts. But you've all been wonderful, and I really appreciate you taking part in this. If you have any questions, again, please reach out to me. Other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful and safe summer. So thank you, and we'll talk to you next year.
Thanks, Bart.
You bet. Nell, did you want to stop the recording?
Bart?
Yes.
Oh, I can wait till the recording stops. This is Nicole at Fremont 25, and we just had a